So, good evening, and tonight we are joined by Charlotte Peters, who is a researcher at FHML and the HEHD, and maybe she would like to introduce herself to begin with. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, well, I'm Charlotte Peters. I am 26 years old, and I'm currently doing a PhD, and it's related to the field of sex work and our sexual healthcare services that the GGD Zuid-Limburg, the South Limburg Public Health Services, offer for free to them. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Maybe you can briefly talk about the work you're currently doing and how you almost got into it.
Yeah, so I graduated. I'm a health scientist. I studied at Maastricht University, and I have a master's in global health and in health education and promotion. And I graduated in 2017, and I was always interested in maternal health and sexual health, and yeah, I always really liked that, and reproductive health as well. And then I saw a vacancy at the GGD Zuid-Limburg, the Regional Public Health Services, for as a policy worker and a researcher for the sexual health department. And so I got into that job, and it was very nice. I did multiple things. I did policy work. I helped schools with their sex education, but I was also doing research on sex workers. And it turned out to be very interesting research, and it's very unique data. There's little to no knowledge about, the things that I've been studying. So my boss, my professor said, hey, let's make a PhD out of this because this is really cool. And that's why I'm here now. I'm currently still doing a PhD on it.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Maybe you could start by explaining what really sex work is and how it obviously relates to your research, because presumably the definition is quite an important starting point.
Yeah, sex work is kind of a broad definition. When you're a sex worker, you have you offer sexual services in exchange for money or goods. And it's very important to also include the goods, because we know in the sex work field, many sex workers also have sex or perform sexual services for example, drugs, or maybe sometimes if they're in a little bit less of a good situation, sometimes for food or for a roof above their head. But mostly, of course, it's usually for money. And I think sex work is it's a little bit of a broader term. In my research, I use really people who have sex for money or goods. So they don't perform sexual services on, for example, the internet, no webcam sex or something like that. But my research mainly focuses on people who actually have sex with another person in exchange for money or goods. But in the field, usually sex workers who, for example, only do webcam sex are also included in the term sex worker. So it's a broader term, actually. And we use the term because in the professional field, sex workers are, sex work is more of an objective, broad term. And for example, prostitute has a little bit of a negative connotation to it. And we want to be more, want to have it a little bit more of an objective term, a positive term. That's why in the professional fields, we'd like to use sex worker and not prostitute, for example. And we know that the sex workers themselves also prefer the term sex worker over, prostitute or something like that.
You're very good at this, trying to steal my job, asking my questions for me. I mean,
oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. But if the PhD doesn't work out, job as a sidekick.
I'm here for it.
Yeah. So obviously, it's a broad term, and it's a term open to both men and women. Maybe you can expand. Are there differences between male sex workers and female sex workers that are important, especially in light of your research?
Yeah, my research focuses on both male and female sex workers. And a lot of people only think of females when we discuss sex workers, but it's a very broad field for any gender. We also see many transgender sex workers, but there also are a lot of male sex workers, and those are a little bit more kind of, I think, hidden groups that as a average citizen you would not really think of, but they are very present. And I think there is a difference in the way services are given. You see that in the Netherlands there's only one sex club for men in which only men work, and of course many sex clubs in red light district where females work. So I think that's a bit of a different perception. Sex work for men and males mostly offer their sex work online. It's more of the way I felt like what they felt like is it's more of a win-win situation for them. And with the females, sometimes we see a little bit more of a dependence, financial dependence, substance dependence. And with many females, I also saw that it was just for a sexual pleasure, and they really enjoyed it, and they loved the empowerment they got out of their sex work. But it's a totally different population, male and female, I would say, yeah.
And with that different population, do you think comes different risks or different things that need to be identified in your research and in other research conducted on the field? And if so, how do you do that? And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what my research focuses on is, of course, the accessibility for sexual healthcare services for all sex workers. And what I really got to know through my research is that they both have different risks indeed. The females are sometimes more vulnerable, but I think all sex workers are vulnerable to violence. But sometimes you see that the females, of course, because of their physical strength, are a little bit more vulnerable to sexual violence. Also, customers are different. So they can be demanding. And if the sex worker is in a vulnerable position, they can be persuaded to have more risk, take more risks in their sex work, have more sexual risk behavior, such as condomless sex. So I would say these are differences, but also we can see biological differences. Male sex workers, for me, I focus on the men who have sex with men. They have, of course, different biology. They often have anal sex, which provides a lot of risks for different STIs, such as HIV, syphilis, hepatitis B also. So these are different risks that also biologically we see when we compare females to males.
Thank you very much for what was a very comprehensive answer, I feel. On that, you mentioned just a bit before that male sex workers are almost a hidden group in the fact that they're much less present. Does that then affect how sexual health care is given to this group? And if so, has your research shone any light on what needs to be done more or less to make that effective?
Absolutely. That's a big difference. So in my research, I focus on the more hidden sex work populations. So the female sex workers, I focus on the female sex workers who work from home. We call them the home sex workers, but actually what we mean by that is that they're self-employed sex workers. So sometimes they also still work at a club, for example, or they do webcam sex, but for a big part, they organize their sex work themselves. They're self-employed. They advertise on the internet themselves. They arrange their own location for the sex work. They do it all themselves, and there's no third party in which they have to give a part of their money to. And that's very nice for the sex worker, but not for us as a healthcare provider, because we want to be able to reach the sex workers for sexual healthcare services. And right now, we see in the Netherlands, it's a trend, ongoing trend, that the clubs are closing, the windows are closing, all the indoor sex work, legal sex work facilities are closing, and there's only very few left. And what this regional public health services would usually do is we would visit them a couple of times a year to see the sex workers, to, if they want to test them and to give them hepatitis B vaccination. And right now that's an issue because we can't visit these sex workers that are self-employed, that we don't know of. There's nowhere we can find them but on the internet where they advertise. So this calls for a different approach because they are more hidden, they're harder to find. And that's really that's why we really have to go as a public health service, as a clinic. We have to go on the internet. We try to be present. We try to send messages to the sex workers like, hey, I am from the GGD. Do you want any help? Do you want to talk about anything? Do you want free and anonymous sexual health care, STI testing? We can help you. But yeah, these sex workers often are illegal sex workers because in the Netherlands, when you're working from home, you need a permit. And municipalities often don't give out these permits. So then the sex workers have no choice but to be an illegal sex worker, even if they don't want to. So they are very kind of hesitant to contact we as a GGD, because officially we're a governmental agency, even though we're not connected to the police. We will never give information to the police, for example, or to the tax office, but they're hesitant because they're like, well, we don't know if they don't do that. So that's a trust issue, and we really have to make them trust us, because we only want to help them with their sexual health, and the rest is none of our business. So that really calls for a different approach.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. I was just going to ask, you started to explain your research and obviously the purpose of it. Maybe you can explain how you went about collecting your data and what data you collected.
Yeah, I will. So what we did is actually what I was just saying. We really wanted to reach the sex workers that right now are not reachable, or right now we don't see them. And it's so important because, well, of course, they're vulnerable to STIs. And more vulnerable because then any regular is not a good word to use, but any non-sex worker, because they have more sexual contacts in a certain time period than non-sex workers do. So it's very important because we see also, especially with the male sex workers, that they have a very, very high percentage of STIs compared to regular, what we call MSM, men who have sex with men. I use the term regular, but that's not a good term because it's not, I don't want to be like, they're all human, they're all normal people. But we see that in a study we found that male sex workers who have sex with men had a 40% of them had an STI compared to like 15% of the non-sex worker MSM, even less, I think 8% compared to the female sex workers. So, and they also had a lot more HIV. So that really shows us that there are a lot more risks, and we need to, we want to help them, and we want to contain the spread of the diseases and, make them sexually healthy, make the region sexually healthy. So what we did is for the female sex workers, we sent messages on the websites they were advertising on. And for the male sex workers, we actually did almost exactly the same. We were also sending messages. We were, for example, also on Grindr, but then we had our profile picture was a kind of a poster which said like, hey, do you do sex work? You can help us. And we also hung up posters at the STI clinics, and there are some gay saunas in the South Limburg region. So we also hung up posters there to recruit male sex workers. And we actually got a lot of response to that, and we did not expect it because they're very hidden. And yeah, that was very great. So in the end, we first did a female sex workers study, and we got to interview 29 female sex workers that were working from home, so self-employed. And then we did the male sex work study, and we recruited 20 male sex workers that were basically self-employed sex workers as well. And it was very interesting we almost interviewed 50 sex workers, and they were all great conversations. And I really liked that. We just had I think when people are not used to this field, they feel like, oh, sex workers, that's such a different population. But it's so nice to see they're all just humans like you and I, and we had great conversations. And I really like to see that the humans behind the stigma of sex work.
That's great to hear. You say you spoke to nearly 50 people in the Limburg region. How extensive do you think sex work is within the region? Because obviously, unlike other areas in the country, there aren't red light districts, so to speak of. But presumably, if you found that many, there's a considerable industry here.
Yeah, you're right. There is a considerable industry, but in our region, it's not as present, not as visibly present. Like you said, there's no red light districts. There are only a few clubs, sex clubs. So it's very hidden, but it's very present. And especially with the male sex workers, people think like, oh, there will probably hardly be any male sex workers, but there are very many. And we also see a different way of enrolling in sex work compared to the females. The females often do it, or they really enjoy sex, and sex workers work. So they just see it as their income, and that's totally okay. But often we also saw some women that were really in debt, and they were like, well, I like sex, or this is my only option. But with the men, we often saw that they were offered sex, offered money or goods for sex, and they were enrolled in it like that. They were like, oh, well, why not? And that's mostly what we see with the men, how it started. But it's so hidden, but it's very present, and it's all on the internet. And when you go look for it, you will find it, but it's just not so visible.
I mean, looking for it must have made for some interesting Google searches, to say the least.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I was used to it because I was working at the sexual health department, and we were all used to that. But definitely, I've seen more things than I've ever seen in my life before. So yeah, definitely. And sometimes I was joking because I was on these porn websites or these advertising websites, and I was like, yeah, this is for my work. This is I'm not doing anything weird. This is part of my job. I was at the office looking up those websites. So that's just part of the job. But I think not suitable for everyone. I think you need to be able to be okay with that.
Yeah, you need to be able to stomach quite a bit by the sounds of it. So we were speaking earlier, and you said you've conducted most of the research and collected most of the data. Maybe you could talk briefly about what you found and what you need to do now to finish off your project.
Yes, absolutely. So the goal of both the female and the male sex work research for us was to talk to them and to gain an insight in who are these sex workers, who are these more hidden populations, how do they organize their sex work, how do they go about it, and what is their testing behavior, their sexual risk behavior. Do they have any sexual risk behavior, or do they always use condoms, and do they get tested regularly, things like that. But what we mostly wanted to know from them is how to reach them. So that was a big question we had for them. Like we were saying, give us tips on how to be able to connect with you. What would you want? Why would you not come to us? And what would make you come to us? Um, and what are the things that are important for you so that we can help you? You can trust us that we are here to help you. So that's for both of the populations was our biggest question. And for the females, it was very important to them to build a personal relationship so that they didn't have to call to the call center and be like, hey, can I make an appointment? But they really preferred to have one on one contact with a nurse. So, have, for example, their WhatsApp number so that they could really be like easily making an appointment, for example, or just say, hey, I have a question, this and this happened, how can you help me, or things like that, so that they don't have to explain themselves over and over again at the call center. Well, the call center is used to that, of course, but still they felt like there was a little of a barrier, and because of the distrust as well, because the GGD isn't a governmental organization, they really needed reaffirmation from us that it's anonymous, it's confidential, and it's for free. And those are things that they said, like, hey, promote that and emphasize that. Say that on the website. Say that every time you contact us. So just that we feel more at ease. But for them, the personal connection and building a relationship was very important. And what we see with the male sex workers, that's totally different, because the male sex workers who have sex with men often do not identify as sex worker. They say, yeah, I have, oh, I get money sometimes for the sex I have, or I get drugs, but I'm not a sex worker. And usually throughout the interview, they would be thinking like, well, maybe I am a sex worker, but they never realized that. And that's, it's okay if they don't think they are a sex worker, but that affects their risk perception and their feeling of, hey, I need to get tested. And also, what is a big barrier for them is that a lot of male sex workers who have sex with men do not identify as homosexual, or well, often they identify as heterosexual or as bisexual, and they feel like, well, I'm not gay, so I'm not going there being gay because I'm not, and there's no problem with being gay, but they felt like, well, that's not what I am. I have sex with men, but I'm not gay, and because often in their private life they would have bisexual relationships, they would have sometimes heterosexual relationships. So that is really for us good to know, so that we know, hey, they do not identify as a sex worker, they do not identify as gay, so we have to make sure we don't address them like that. But also when we advertise and promote our sexual healthcare services, that we don't affiliate well, their sex work or them with those things, because then they feel like, hey, that's not for me. And also just the promotion on the internet, they said that that was very important. They really appreciated that we were present on those websites, that we were present on Grindr, so that they could talk to us, and we could counsel them, give them advice, and yeah, so that's basically what came out of the results for their reachability.
That's very interesting, because you've almost got two very different answers there for two very different groups. And
Absolutely.
maybe just, you may not want to hear this question, but obviously you reach the men via Grindr, via the internet. So how do you almost justify saying that this was like, we didn't bias the sample by finding the sample through the way they're suggesting we continue to use?
Yeah, no, you're right, but absolutely. And I think the really hidden, the really scared sex workers, we will never reach with research like that, and maybe we might never reach them. But I felt like a lot of sex workers we talked to, they had, for example, never been to the GGD, and they were really like, hey, this is great, and I trust you, and I told you my story, and I always said I never needed to, but now I'm very happy that I did that, and there's someone sitting next to me that is not judging me, and I'm just telling you my story. And I think it made them realize um, what they needed, and that they really wanted to go to the GGD. But we also recruited, for example, people throughout different areas, not only through the internet. So the internet was a big part of it, but also through the saunas, the gay saunas, or the STI clinic themselves. And so we tried not to recruit as many people through the STI clinic because they were already there. But we also wanted to know, hey, why are you here, and why is someone else not here? So we tried to get a little bit more of multiple angles. But you're right. Yeah, we'll probably never be able to reach the very, 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 very hidden group of that group. But yeah, it did help. And also the people we did not recruit to the internet often said that's the place to go.
Yeah, and I think that there's only so much that you can do. You can't be expected to almost start up the Spanish Inquisition to go and find where the hidden male sex workers are.
Exactly, and they have to be motivated as well.
But obviously, you have been very motivated in your research over the past couple of years. So maybe you can share with the audience what you want to do with this once you're done, and maybe with your future career. Do you want to stay researching in this field? Do you want to move out?
Yeah, well, first of all, what I would like to do with the results, of course, that we want to share it. I have shared a part of it already on congresses, on national congresses, international congresses, and this summer we will again be presenting some of the male research on the STI HIV World Congress. So that's very important to share that knowledge, because on these specific groups of sex workers, so the self-employed sex workers, hardly anything is to be found in data, in scientific data. It's a big, big gap. And what we want to do, we really want to try. You already spoke to my colleague, Hanneke Groente. She's working on Limburg for Zero home sampling kits. And this is also a way to go with the male sex workers. We discussed the home sampling kits in the interviews with the male sex workers, and they were very interested in it. And I think we can really reach an extra hidden group by promoting the distribution of these home sampling kits on the platforms we were already talking about before. So the internet platforms, the websites and apps commonly used by sex workers. To promote it on there, they can easily order a home sampling kit, and they can receive trustworthy counseling afterwards. If they, for example, need it, if they're tested positive, they will receive medicine for free, treatment, and we really hope that that's the way to get them in care. Also, the sex workers who have not been in care before. So that's kind of step one to what to do next with these research results. And of course, we are spreading them on the regional public health services platforms. We want to basically spread the word, like, hey, these sex workers say this is the way they want to be reached. These are the issues, and these how we can overcome them. So spread them in our national network. And after I finished my PhD, I would really love to stay in the field of sexual health. I really am very interested still in the sex work field, and I think I really like how I got a little specialized in it. But yeah, I'll probably see what my opportunities are. If I have a possibility to stay, I would love to, but I'm not counting on it because, job opportunities at the regional public health services are scarce often. So yeah, I might want to go to abroad for a while. I would love to go to Africa for a while and to work on sexual health for marginalized populations there, and also on just reproductive and sexual health education. So I would love to work on that, or work on national sex work programs or sexual health programs. If in Africa I don't have the opportunity to do so. So yeah, definitely I hope for a future in this field.
Well, that is definitely great to hear. Now, as they say, time flies when you're having fun. So we're coming to the end of our period, but maybe there are some things that you've taken away, not necessarily research wise, but personally from your time doing this that you want to share with our audience.
For me, it's, I think, the importance of a human conversation, a non-judgmental human conversation. I really felt that that's one of the most important things, just to treat each other equally, and then you get amazing, beautiful conversations, and that's what everyone deserves. So yeah, I think that's for me one of the most important things I learned from it.
Well, that's definitely a very nice ending to this conversation. Thank you very much for giving up part of your Friday evening.
Thank you for having me.